So today, or rather this week, I want to talk about a number of terms that we tend to use as we talk about different religious traditions. We had some fun looking at where we draw boundaries around religious traditions, whether or not sports fanaticism is a religion or not a religion, and the like. But what I want to look at today are terms that we use in general with various religious traditions. Myth, ritual, taboo, evil. We could include sacred, we could include Bible, we could include a number of different things. But these are the four that I thought we should look at this week. So let's start off with myth. What is a myth? If we were having a class discussion, I might ask you, what is a myth? So it might be fun just to write down what you think a myth is, or what the word means to you. All right, frequently we talk about a myth as if it could be something that's false, could be a story, could be a story about gods. Indeed, that might be a term we should spend a little bit of time on. You've frequently heard people say, oh, that's just a myth. Oh, that's something that's not true. Or that's the Greek myths. In fact, the term mythos comes from ancient Greek as opposed to logos. They're both stories. In general, myth in the ancient Greek or mythos tended to be fanciful stories. And certainly you see that with, your Greek mythology. And I'm sure many of you have read Rick Riordan and are familiar with all of that. In any case, in general, certainly from a functionalist point of view, I don't tend to use myth as a story that is inherently false. To be perfectly honest, I'm not all that interested in the truth value of a particular story. And for the class, I'm not interested in truth values. Whether or not something is false or true isn't interesting to me. Ultimately, what I'm interested in is whether or not a group or a community or a religion sees something as being true. And so to this end, when we talk about a myth, we're not talking about false stories. We're talking about stories that are important to a group. And I often define myth as a story around which a community identifies itself. Some scholars say if it doesn't have a myth or it doesn't have gods, it can't be a myth. I disagree with that. I think that you can have a myth without gods, depending on how you want to define gods. And I commented on many of your response papers about how one goes about defining God or gods. As far as I'm concerned, a myth is a story around which a community identifies itself. To that end, we have Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Icelandic mythology, African mythology, Hindu, Christian, etc. And I want to make sure I throw in those, Christians have stories, and they have stories around which they identify themselves. So we can talk about the mythology of Jesus. That does not mean that the stories are inherently false, nor does it mean they're inherently true. It just means that these are pivotal stories around which a community identifies itself. Similarly, within Judaism, you can have the mythology around Moses. Does it mean that Moses was false? Not necessarily. Does it mean that Moses, the story of Moses is inherently true? It doesn't necessarily mean that either. But it is a pivotal story around which a community identifies itself. It has a particular function. Now, to be perfectly clear, this is a functionalist approach to the study, right? So you can see Durkheim lurking in the back of this approach. Eliade may very well have a different approach. And Freud probably would go with this as well, although for him it would be obviously evocative of a neuroses. Okay, so that's myth. All right, the second thing that I want to talk about then is ritual. One of the interesting questions that we can ask ourselves is what separates a ritual from a habit? Why is one thing a ritual? Why is taking the Eucharist within Catholicism a ritual, whereas something else that's done on a regular basis could simply be a habit. And I think I used in the previous lecture, discussion about brushing your teeth. Why is brushing your teeth not a ritual, but rather just a habit? Many scholars put ritual or discuss rituals as a way in which one community, or the profane world, attempts to communicate or interact with the sacred world. That rituals are a physical action, and they have to have a physical action of one sort or another to separate it from necessarily prayer, although prayer could include a ritual, but I digress. A physical action that allows one, the profane world, if we're dividing the world in the sense that Iliade did, between the sacred and the profane, the heavens, whatever that term means, as well as the profane, or the earth down here, and a ritual facilitates communication between these two. It could be a form of ritual sacrifice, an offering of libation, or food, or wine, or meat in some way or another, or money, or it could be consumption of something, it could be performing an action, something that influences the heavens or the divine. Now, of course, that's not the only way in which you can have a ritual, but it is one understanding of it. Idealists will say that a mythology came first and that rituals then work together with mythology. Others will say that rituals came first and that myths were developed to explain, why do we do this? Oh, we do this because of the story. There's no necessary consent, or there isn't necessarily a consensus between the two, but rituals tend to be physical actions that influence something. I'm also going to say that rituals tend to be used as points of change, or that they occur at times of change. You can have a ritual, a life cycle ritual, that takes you from one state of being to another state of being. Not everybody loves Joseph Campbell, but he talks about the monomyth and this idea of going somewhere, engaging in some sort of dangerous behavior, and returning changed. And so you can have a ritual at different life cycles. For instance, a bar mitzvah, going within Judaism, or a bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah for boys, bat mitzvah for girls, going from an age of childhood to adulthood, or essentially entering into puberty. Likewise, we have rituals at times of change, and I'm sure you can think of a couple of rituals that you've probably gone through or seen. For instance, graduation is a ritual. It is a formalized understanding of change from one status in life to another status in life. So consequently, you're going from a time of being a student to someone who has fulfilled one level of education. Another important ritual that many people, are familiar with is a wedding. Now, a wedding doesn't have to be a religious wedding. It doesn't have to be a Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, etc. wedding. But you still have most people who get married, even if they're not Christian or Muslim or religious in some way, tend to have some sort of ritual, some sort of ceremony that takes them from being single to being married. That ritual facilitates this change. Likewise, when somebody dies, we have a ritual, that is to say a funeral, that takes, for those who are still alive, the world wherein that person was present to a world wherein that person is no longer present. And there's a ritual that helps facilitate that change in status. You could also see a ritual being performed in order to aid in the healing of something. In any case, a ritual is a formalized behavior that either facilitates communication with the divine or is associated with a lifestyle change. Or it's not a lifestyle change, but rather a life stage change. the last thing that I want to talk about are a couple of related terms, taboo and evil. And I forgot one last part of ritual that we can consider, is that if somebody breaks a taboo, there can be a ritual to fix the world, or to create order out of chaos. Taboos tend to help us order the world. You can have a taboo against murder, or a taboo against theft, a taboo against marrying the wrong person, or a taboo against speaking ill of the dead, or a taboo against being disrespectful to your teachers, or to your parents, or to your elders. Taboos are ways in which we create order out of the world and create structure. Consequently, when a taboo is broken, we frequently, both in a religious sense as well as in a quote, non-religious sense, if we can divide the world into those two categories, which, if you haven't realized by now, is more problematic than you might think it is. But if we can pretend that there is a religious world and a non-religious world, we certainly have taboos in a non-religious sense. If you drive too fast, you have broken a taboo. And what might happen if you break that taboo? You might get pulled over, and you will have to go through some sort of ritual in order to fix things. That is to say, you probably will have to pay a fine, or you might have to go to court, and you certainly have ritualized actions in the presence of a judge. So a ritual may facilitate the rectification of a taboo being broken. And one other example, if you murder somebody, violate the taboo against murder, what happens? Typically, you go to prison, in which case the world makes sense again. The bad guy has been put in prison, everything is fine, and that person has, when they come out, they have paid their debt to society. They have gone through a ritual process and have come out, with their debts paid, etc. But a taboo isn't simply, a law. We talked about a taboo, and we saw this with Durkheim. He referred to, the definition of religion as a set of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things that are set apart and forbidden. That is to say, things that are taboo, things that you do not do, or do not touch, or do not interact with. For Durkheim, taboo is clearly part and parcel of what it means to have a religion. Be sacred, the thing that you don't touch, isn't necessarily evil, it's just that you don't touch it. There are rules about how you behave in a church, or in a mosque, or in a cemetery. In ancient Judaism, there were things that you did not do, like enter into the Holy of Holies. It was forbidden for anyone but the high priest to enter into the presence of God, because God was so holy that you couldn't violate the presence of God. There was a taboo against that. Evil is often associated with taboo. And clearly, I'm not going to have time to look at all of the various ways in which we can talk about evil in the next 3 or 4 minutes. But suffice it to say, evil is typically a large part of what we understand when we talk about religions. Now, sometimes we have a dualistic religion. Ancient Zoroastrianism, for example, was a dualistic religion wherein we saw forces of evil battling forces of good for conquest of the cosmos, etc. We certainly see echoes of that in modern Christian thought. That is to say, many Christians believe that the world is a battleground between the forces of Satan and the forces of God, and that they are equally opposed, perhaps. Ultimately, God is typically seen as being victorious, but Satan is giving God a good run for his money. Interestingly enough, that doesn't play out with what people frequently refer to as Christian theology, where God is all-powerful, and Satan certainly is not all-powerful. Where God is all-powerful and Satan is not all-powerful, but we see this idea that angels and demons are battling each other. So what makes a demon evil? What is this idea of evil? By and large, evil, it tends to be something that doesn't fit well, something that isn't human, and the monstrous, that thing that is unclassifiable. And what do you do with that thing that doesn't fit well or that is unclassifiable? Well, frequently we have a number of associations or a number of approaches to that thing. And there's a really excellent book, and when I teach a class on evil, I have people read Mary Douglas's book, Purity and Danger, which is pretty phenomenal. You can find most of it online for free if you want to just search again for Mary Douglas, Purity and Danger. I'll probably put it on the screen somewhere at this point. And she talks about a number of ways in which we deal with that thing, the anomalous, that doesn't fit into a category. The first thing is we try to force it. Okay, there are actually 5 things that Mary Douglas. The first of these is to reduce the ambiguity by placing it in one category or another, even if it doesn't fit. The second is to physically control the thing, killing the anomalous. The third is avoid the thing. By avoiding it, we reinforce the pattern. The fourth is label it as dangerous, which puts it beyond any dispute. And the fifth is to occasionally use it in a ritual, which then enriches the meaning of that ritual. And again, finally, she says we attempt to control it. And sometimes with that thing, we destroy it. We destroy the monstrous, the evil, the dangerous. Evil, in many religious traditions, is an element of chaos. We have rules that are set up about taboo things or sacred phenomenon. And so the evil thing is the thing that violates those taboos, the thing that breaks down our comfortable world of cosmos and brings about an agent of chaos, or is an agent of chaos. Now, depending on the world stance of individuals, this could be people who don't conform to gender normative modes of dress. That is to say, let's look at the 60s in the United States. Men who had long hair, women who had short hair, women who wore pants, men who wore skirts. These things didn't conform to the rules and the taboos about gender normativity, and so they were seen as evil. I heard a story on NPR not too long ago about some of the first female punk bands in Britain who definitely did not conform to norms of feminine dress. And one of I believe it was the lead singer of this band, and I'm blanking on the name of the band, was actually stabbed, not once, but multiple times because of what she was wearing. The person who stabbed her felt that she was evil. She did not belong in society. She was chaotic, failed to do what was proper for a young British woman in the 60s, and took it upon himself to physically control that, to stab her. He dehumanized her and attempted to kill her. We like to think that evil is consistent in world religions. We like to think that all religions say be nice or do unto others as you would have them do unto you. One of the interesting things though is that not everything conforms to, and not everybody conforms to who the other is. Who is it that you should be good to? Who classifies as human? Who violates and what it means to violate the various taboos within a society. It would be, convenient if we said, oh, evil is Satan, and he lives in hell and he has a pitchfork, and it's all, just Satan attempting to take your soul. But that actually is a relatively simplistic understanding of evil. As far as this class is concerned, and again, this is more or less a functionalist approach. Evil is a classification, and we label something as evil. And once we label something as evil, then we can, attempt to control it in one way or another. So always make sure you're careful of and pay pay attention when people say that's evil. What does it mean to be evil? What is the underlying motivation when we say something is evil? Is it simply something that goes against the rules that we establish as social? And why do we have those particular rules or those taboos within a society? In general, all four of these terms, evil, taboo, ritual, myth, and we can throw in sacred to some extent with taboo. These are all terms that we, as scholars of religion, can use to examine other traditions. And to be perfectly honest, we could look at, let's say, sports fanaticism. Does sports fanaticism have mythology? It certainly has mythology. If you listen to any, Browns fan talking about the first time they won a game again, it's or even the myth of next year, it's a narrative around which a particular group of people identifies themselves. Rituals, physical ways in which people engage in the world, hopefully trying to change the world, maybe through the intercession of a heavenly actor. We see those in most religious traditions. Certainly there are taboos and understandings of evil. Even in, let's say, Theravada Buddhism, which we haven't talked about yet, but we should get to in a week or two. Theravada Buddhism, by and large, doesn't have gods, and that's one of those examples that we often discuss that doesn't deal with a god. They talk about the world being suffering. We have the Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. In order to end suffering, you end desire, and you end desire by following the Eightfold Path. Even there, we have understandings of evil, that which is outside of what you should do, outside of the norms that you should engage in. Ultimately, that which brings about suffering. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them on the discussion board, and I'll probably give you a video next week.